Greetings and salutations, one and all. Welcome back to the channel, and I sincerely hope you've brought popcorn to the couch with you for this one, because I have a very important announcement to make. I have 13 books to talk about today in this video, and I think this is going to be the longest video I've published on YouTube since I started making content. So go ahead, get your favorite snacks, get nice and cozy. We've got a lot of content to go through today, and I am so excited to share this experience with you. Now, before we get to the gritty and gross stuff, just in case you're new here and we haven't been formally introduced, hey there, I'm Howie, and I am a professional reader of tarot cards and astrology by trade. I am a chronic non-reader of horror fiction in my spare time, which is probably why you're here today, and I'm a huge planning enthusiast. Because let's face it, something around here needs to help me keep all these crazy trains of thoughts running on the tracks. And as I mentioned in today's video, I'm going through a slew of reading experiences that I had over the course of April and May. And the reason I have so many books to talk about is I gave myself an extra challenge last month. I partook in a month-long readathon and really pushed myself to consume as much horror literature as I possibly could get my claws on. So I read 4 books in the month of April and 9 books in the month of May. Like, way to go me. This is me as someone who just gave up on the passion of reading for years upon years upon years on end. I am so excited to dive into today's books. So without further ado, because I don't want this video to ramble on too long, let's get into the good stuff, shall we? Now we're going to start my adventure where I started it, which is the beginning of April. And I kicked off this reading month with The Only Good Indians by Stephen Graham Jones, who is an Indigenous author and one that has been on my radar since I started getting back into reading. Now, The Only Good Indians is not a new release. I believe this came out in 2020, and I remember there was so much hype about this book when it originally came out, but alas, I was a non-reader at the time. Times have changed, and I finally got my hands on this book. The story of The Only Good Indians focuses on 4, soon to be 3 main characters. And that wasn't a spoiler either, because in the very first chapter, one of these characters is immediately offed in very peculiar, spooky, somewhat supernatural circumstances, perhaps? It's unclear at first, but there are definitely folklore and supernatural elements peppered throughout this book. Now, there is a lot of social commentary on racism and intergenerational trauma that Stephen Graham Jones does a really great job of incorporating into the story. Some of the more negative reviews that I see on his work in general, I feel like the divisiveness about Jones's writing style is because this book in particular was very res-coded. I'm an Indigenous person myself. I grew up almost my entire life on a reservation. There is just some form of social etiquette that you don't get off the res. So for all my folks out there who are res as well, you will read this book and you will understand exactly what I'm talking about. There were a few social interactions in here that genuinely made me laugh out loud because they're so true to how we interact with one another. Now, our 4 main characters took part in an illegal hunting trip 10 years prior to this story. However, something goes horrendously wrong that night, and what transpires haunts them, quite literally, into their adult lives. So now 10 years later, something, a presence that was spawned during that moment, follows them and builds up this twisty psychological dread and tension around all of their lives. And that's what I really loved about this story as well. You really wonder, is something spooky actually going on here? Or are these characters just so traumatized that they're all slowly losing their marbles? The book ramps up about halfway through and things get very gory and very grisly very quickly. And I do appreciate how the ending is, I don't want to say it's drawn out because that sounds so negative. It was a joy to read, it was terrifying, but it wasn't a quick one and done 2-page twist reveal. There was a story within a story towards the end of the book, and I ended up giving this book 4.5 stars out of 5. I had a fantastic time reading it. Just the fact that I could connect with it as an Indigenous person from that perspective, I think made it all that much better. Will I be reading Stephen Graham Jones in the future? Yeah, absolutely. In fact, I think my next target mark from his work is going to be The Buffalo Hunter. That I can't wait to get my claws on. Speaking of twisty psychological stories, the next book that I read in sequence is Last to Leave the Room by Caitlin Starling. It was on my TBR, but one of my partners gifted it to me for our anniversary, and I didn't really know what to expect. In fact, the opening of this book is very sci-fi, and I was actually wondering, is this not a horror book? Did I not choose a book within, my genre or my taste in reading? But let me tell you, viewer, this book turned out to be a 5 out of 5. If I could give it a 6 out of 5, I would. So Last to Leave the Room does open with some pretty heavy sci-fi undertones. And the story revolves around Dr. Thompson Rivers, who is a very successful, very intelligent, and highly decorated scientist in her field of communications. And she is on the cutting edge of what she believes is the most important breakthrough in ComSci. However, there is a very unfortunate obstacle in the way of her and what she believes to be her upcoming fame with this new discovery. And that is the fact that the entire city that she's living in and conducting her experiments in is sinking. Worst of all, her basement is sinking at an alarmingly faster rate than anywhere else in San Sirocco. And if anybody in upper management were to find out that the subsidence is happening in her basement, oh no, she can't have that, because that would be the one piece of evidence somebody could use against her and accuse her of being the catalyst of this upcoming natural disaster. And she didn't get to this position by being demure and polite and soft. She is very cold and calculating as a personality. So her employers won't stand for it. The municipal government certainly won't stand for it. So what is Dr. Thompson Rivers to do? Well, she attempts to handle the problem all on her own. And eventually, the stretching of her basement reveals a door that never used to be there before. And through that door walks out an exact copy of Dr. Thompson Rivers, albeit demure, polite, and soft. Basically the exact opposite of our dear Dr. Rivers. So now Dr. Rivers is really in a pickle, because not only does she not want her employer to know that there's subsidence happening in her basement and then possibly blame her for all of the problems happening in the city, now she has walking, talking, breathing evidence that something seriously up is going on in her home, her sanctuary. And as this story progresses, things start to change, and Dr. Rivers slowly starts to lose parts of herself in the process. So you want to talk about psychological puzzles and dread? This book is ripe with that stuff. This is such a thinky type of book. This is not action and explosions and guts and gore. There is a little bit of violence in it, but the focus is really on the existentialism. This book seriously asks, what makes you you? This is all about the concept of Dharma in Hinduism. I talk about this sometimes in my astrology videos. Dharma basically boils down to that without which we are not us. And let me tell you, identity crisis is like the #1 theme in The Last to Leave the Room. This was such a pleasant surprise as well, because the opening took me for such a loop. Like I said, I opened it and thought, oh, I'm reading a sci-fi novel. I wonder what the horror is going to be like. Like, how is this going to play out? I had such a great time speculating and pontificating about exactly what was going on and trying to come up with logical answers as to how this was possible. So like I said, absolutely a 5 out of 5 book. I would give it 6 stars if I possibly could. Highly recommend it. However, If you're not into those more thinky type of books, or you don't want something that's more of a slow, methodical build-up, a slow dread, if you will, this might not be the book for you. In case you can't tell, clearly I was on a roll in the month of April, and I wanted to keep that momentum going with another banger, so I kind of went back to an author that I had a really good time with earlier in the year, and that was Christina Henry. I read The House That Horror Built in March, and I had a fantastic time with that book, so I picked up The Place Where They Buried Your Heart. And oh my god, y'all, this is another 5-star read from me. This was so good. I'm a huge Henry stan at this point. I will be reading more from Christina Henry in the very near future. But before we get to that point, we gotta talk about this book. Now, this book explores an interesting side to the trope of the haunted house. And it opens with our dear main character, Jessie Campanelli, at the tender age of 13, who, in a fit of teenager angst and arrogance, dares her little brother, 8-year-old Paul, to go spend a few hours in the McIntyre house to prove that he's a big boy and he's not a little kid, he's not a little baby anymore. And he does. And in Jesse's words, he is eaten by the house. That same house that is a black smear on the history of this neighborhood. Everybody of every generation that has ever lived on that street knows you do not go in the McIntyre house. You do not go near the McIntyre house. You don't walk by it. You don't look at it. You don't even breathe near it. Something horrific happened in that house, and horrific things continue to happen around that house. The entire neighborhood is terrified of the McIntyre place. We have heavy themes of grief as Jessie grows up and continues to lose important people to her. The neighborhood continues to be tormented by whatever this deep, dark, depressing void is that the McIntyre place represents. And so the whole story is told across different timelines, from when Jessie is young to even the origin story of the entire house itself. We see Jessie as an adult as well, and what I like about this book is the writing style, the delivery of the story. I found some negative reviews had an issue with this, but personally, I really felt like I was just sitting in a coffee shop, sharing a coffee, and interviewing Jessie Campanelli herself. So it's very casual. There's an interview style to the storytelling, and it does jump around a lot. Even within the same chapter, you're often switching paragraph to paragraph between one point of view or one timeline and another. And I suppose some people might find that jarring and difficult to follow. For me, though, it just added so much realism to the characters and to the story itself. It made it come to life. It made it rich and believable as well. I really loved all of the themes that were in this book too. This is a very emotionally gut-wrenching story. Some of the stuff that happens in here is depressing, y'all. Henry does not spare the children. There is some horrific things that happen to very young individuals in this story. So do be prepared for that. Make sure you steel yourself for those moments. They get intense. But if you love the gore, if you love the haunted houses, I'm sure you'll have a great time reading this too. And then we hit a brick wall. All good things must come to an end, I suppose. So unfortunately, I ended April on an absolute wet fart of a book, and I had high expectations for this one. So I went with Bodies of Work by Clay McLeod Chapman. And if you don't remember my review of Ghost Eaters earlier this year, let me tell you, my expectations for this man are off the charts, up here at the apex of the birth chart, so to speak. I had a lot of expectations for this book, and it let every single one of them down. 1 star. Absolutely 1 star. My main problem is the pacing was painfully slow. It's a novella. It's 160 odd some pages. It was so slow, I really felt like it went absolutely nowhere. Now, the story of Bodies of Work is about Winston. Poor old man Winston. Such a forgettable nobody. Just a regular old guy with no friends, no family, coasting through life. But God has given him a quest. Winston is supposed to be the scribe of the butterfly girls, and he's here to recount and write down their stories and help them save some sort of alternate dimension. I don't know, this guy is bat insane. And the title of the book he's working on in this book is like 5 pages long. Listen, I zone out every time he tries to spell it out for me in this story. Now, Winston is attempting to finish this masterpiece of a Bible, essentially, by murdering young girls and stealing their voices, and then cocooning them and turning them into the butterfly girls of this epic tale. Like I said, absolutely insane. He's a very traumatized individual. You do get a little bit of a glimpse into his childhood, and it was messed up. So I understand where the crazy's coming from, but the story was still lacking in enough substance to keep me hooked. This actually takes place across 2 different perspectives, where you have Winston, the forgettable homicidal axe murderer, and then you have the perspective of those young girls that he's murdered. And I actually kind of enjoyed their interactions. They really felt like the muses from Hercules, where one of the girls is trying to narrate the story, but you also get the feedback and the bickering, this sibling-like bickering of all the other girls in the background. So I find that might be hard to follow for some readers. I found it endearing and it did make me laugh at some parts. It was very charming, but it was not enough to save the fact that this is a very bare bones story. And I was disappointed by the ending. I'm not going to mince words here. I was really disappointed by the ending. Like I said, I had much higher expectations for this author. What a tragic read. So 1 star, would not recommend, skip this one, move on to literally anything else. And now, in no particular order, I'm going to run through all 9 books that I read for the month of May as part of this readathon that I was doing. And I'm really glad that I managed to get through this many, because I was just introduced to so many delightfully colorful stories. We don't have any 1 stars in this batch, thankfully, but there are a couple of outliers that are like a 2.5 or a 3-star read. So let's carry on and start with Bloom by Delilah S. Dawson. And as you can see, this is another bit of a novella. It's a very short read. There's a couple of short books in here just because I wanted to collect as many points for this readathon as possible. Now, this book is interesting because not a lot really happens for about 90% of it. However, things get absolutely crazy at the very end of this book. And there are hints to this big twisty reveal if you pay attention throughout the rest of the story. So the story of Bloom is about Rosemary, or Ro. She really does prefer Ro, who meets Ash at a farmer's market. And Ash is just the most curious and divine woman that Ro has ever come across. She is immediately smitten in ways she never thought possible. She thought she was straight. So there is a very interesting and delightful sapphic relationship that blooms between these 2 women. And to Ro, Ash seems like she can do anything and everything. She sells homemade soaps and candles and the most delicious cupcakes Ro has ever tasted. She farms, she has chickens, she takes care of this homestead all on her own. Highly independent young woman. And as the relationship starts to develop between these 2 and Ro is eventually invited to Ash's homestead, things get strange. But Ro is so enamored with Ash that she's willing to overlook a few petty squabbles and a few disagreements and a few miscommunications. But like I said, things get absolutely insane in the last 10, maybe even 5% of the book. It was worth it to read through all of the giggly and sweet and very romance-oriented beginning parts of this novel to get that absolutely crazy ending. The ending is very reminiscent of a certain Stephen King story. And I'm not going to tell you which one, and you're not going to be able to guess which one because there are so many books and stories and novels and movies. You probably won't be able to guess what I'm actually talking about until you get towards that point in the book. I gave this book 4 stars out of 5. Maybe I would give it 3.5 if I'm being a little bit more hypercritical of the fact that really nothing much actually happens in the beginning sections of this book. Really, the introduction is kind of 90% of it, and you get the gritty, grisly twist only at the very end of it. But I really enjoyed being strung along. Now, would I recommend this book? Yeah, probably. As long as you go into it with an open mind, understanding that you're going to be reading a sapphic romance for the majority of the story. Next up, we have another pretty short book, and this, even if you're not on Book Talk, even if you're not on BookTube, even if you don't read books very much, you probably will have heard of this book at some point in your life, because social media will not shut up about it. And I finally read it myself. Tender is the Flesh by Agostina Bazterrica. And oh my god, this book had me staring at my ceiling for like an hour, just in a state of existential crisis. We are quite literally 2.5 steps away from what happens in this book in reality. This book is absolutely horrifying in the most existential way possible. This got me thinking. I needed a shower after this. So I rated this book 5 stars out of 5 stars. And this is another one where there isn't much happening. But whereas Bloom was very superficial, very bubbly, it was romantic. This is just Orwell on steroids. This is dystopian cranked up to 11. Every sentence is riddled with absolutely depressing depravity. Humans are disgusting. I am just disgusted with humanity after reading this book. The story of this book follows our main character who goes through the day-to-day routine he does as an employee of a slaughterhouse. Now, that doesn't sound as bad at first, but dear viewer, you need to understand something about the universe we are operating in here. So in this universe, all animals across the entire globe have contracted some form of virus that is fatal to humans, which means all wildlife and all livestock on the planet has been rendered inedible by humans. And apparently we are just so obsessed with our craving for meat that the government legalizes cannibalism and we start breeding and raising people for consumption. It is grim in this book. This world is horrible. And the casual way that they talk about the product, the head, the meat, it just made my stomach turn. Like I said, stared at my ceiling for an hour, just trying to ground myself again after reading this book. Anyway, the story is the day-to-day routine of our main character whose father is in really poor condition, like in late stages of Alzheimer's in an old folks' home. His wife has not left him, but basically left him and is staying with her mother. And he just feels like he has no anchor point to whatever shred of humanity he has left in him. and going through the day-to-day grind of having to train new employees at the slaughterhouse where we slaughter humans, do not forget that, starts to chip away at whatever sanity he has left. And so this story is the slowest of burns as we watch a man just lose his entire sense of humanity and self-control and autonomy, page by page by agonizing page. And the ending of this book actually upset me. So by page 3, I had some speculations of what was going on in the background, because remember, we're talking about an entire global event that has required humanity to adapt in a most horrific and inhumane way. So there's a lot of themes that deal with the humanities, that deal with what makes a person a person. Very similar to one of the books that I just reviewed. I think it was Last to Leave the Room, where we were talking about the concept of dharma, that without which we are not us, that without which we are apparently not human, according to the people in this book. But because of the setup at the beginning, I kind of speculated that there was more to the story than the government was letting on, that there was more behind the scenes, and maybe there's the theme of global manipulation happening in this story. And funny enough, this is not a spoiler either, because on page 14, our main character literally says exactly what I was thinking. And then the ending happens. And I, once more time, staring at the ceiling for an hour, I was very upset. I was heartbroken, in dismay. I was distraught. There, that's the perfect word. I was distraught coming out of this book. But it was so good. It was so good. This is the type of book that sticks itself to your soul and refuses to let go. This is going to haunt me for a long time moving forward because of the blisteringly accurate social commentary in it. Highly recommend it, but be prepared. You're going to need a strong stomach for this one, folks. Next up, let's go ahead and talk about Nestlings by Nat Cassidy, my first Cassidy book. And my first comment for this book is, it is gross. There are some grotesque scenes that happen and are described in this book that really made my stomach kind of just do somersaults as I was reading it. Ugh. Definitely gives you shivers up and down your spine. So the premise of Nestlings is we have a young married couple, Anna and Reed, who are looking for desperately looking for a way to leave their current living situation. Their landlord is an absolute racist, homophobic piece of shit. Like, this is the bottom of the barrel when it comes to humanity. This guy is a piece of work. And so they are desperate to leave that behind and find literally anywhere else to live. And as it so happens, they quite literally hit the lottery. There is a building in New York City that runs an annual lottery where they will randomly select someone living in New York to instead come live on the top floor of this very expensive and prestigious tower set of condos. And of course, Anna and Reed are the chosen ones for this condo. Now, something to remember here is Anna experienced severe complications giving birth to their child, Charlie, who is not even a year old yet. And so Anna's in a wheelchair. So there's a lot of hard times that are burdening this couple right at the start of the story. And they think this is their ticket out of their destitute situation. This amazing, expensive, lavish condo with security in a well-to-do neighborhood, and it gets them away from their crazy landlord. Unfortunately, as my dad always used to say, if it's too good to be true, it is probably too good to be true. And it is definitely true of this book. So things start going wrong and weird and terrifying for our young couple very quickly. Anna is already struggling with the idea of being a mother. There are some very intense scenes in here about the grief of leaving behind your old life to step into motherhood, the sacrifices it takes. Remember, her body is all kinds of fucked up and she's in a wheelchair because of the birth of her daughter. So there's a very traumatic animosity under the surface of this poor woman as a result of having to completely flip her life upside down for the sake of a child that she may or may not have wanted in the end. The themes of motherhood and sacrifice are very, very strong in this book. That might be a trigger warning for some folks out there, I'm not sure, so I'm just going to kind of put a little footnote for anybody watching this video. But as we progress through Anna and Reed's lives trying to get used to this new situation and all of these new changes, things start going strangely, not just around the condo, but with their child as well. Charlie slowly starts to seem less and less like Charlie and more like someone or something else. And someone keeps leaving the damn window open in the baby's room. And they live on the top floor of this condo, let's not forget, folks. So there's a psychological element to what's going on here. And you really see Anna and Reed get pit against one another because they clearly have very different sets of values and very different life goals that all of the hauntings and all of the terror that start to unfold in their new living situation very easily aggravates and exaggerates, and it just starts falling apart for them. I felt so bad for these folks by the end of the book. And when it comes to the grossness of the book, I don't want to spoil anything, but I will say the haunting that is taking place in Nestlings is very Guillermo del Toro. And I'm not going to say, which story, which movie, but once I got to the big reveal and I understood what Anna and Reed were dealing with, there's a very specific section of Del Toro's work that I immediately thought of. It was very familiar, and it's one of my favorite pieces of his work, actually. I wish I could talk about more of those reasons, but that would give away too many spoilers. So we're just going to move on to the rating, and Nestlings gets a solid 4 stars out of 5 from me. I had a really great time with this, and the characters, you might find yourself frustrated with the characters in this book. Anna gets a bit whiny. Reed is kind of stupid, I'm not going to lie. But given all of the shock and horror that they are subjected to, it's easy to understand how a fragile mind can crumble so quickly when it's put under that kind of pressure. Give it a go for yourself, and let me know in the comments if you like this book too. Now, this next one is interesting because this one is actually a reread. That was one of the prompts for the readathon I did in May, although I kind of have it on my list to reread some of the books that I had read during the pandemic, because empty fishbowl brain doesn't remember anything very well. And I'd also like to annotate these books because I didn't get a chance to do that the first time. So my reread in May was A God in the Shed by J.F. Zubo. And Zubo is actually a local author as well. I met him face to face at a local book convention. So I've talked about A God in the Shed briefly on the channel before. And when I read this during the pandemic, I believe this book came out in 2017, but I read it around 2020, 2021, give or take. I was in love with it. It was a 5-star read for me. I was obsessed with this book. And it is written to make room for a trilogy. As far as I know, the trilogy is actually not done yet. The second book is out, and I have read that one. I'm still sitting here, eyes on the clock, waiting for the third one to be written and published, but no news on that just yet. Now, this book is interesting because upon rereading it, maybe my tastes have changed, maybe my expectations and standards for the literature I consume has changed, and I know what I like and I dislike now. I actually think this is more of a 3-star read rather than a 5-star read. That's not to say there's something wrong with the story. I really enjoy the premise and especially the lore. there is a bit of a folk supernatural horror type of shtick to this story, and essentially what it comes down to is that title. A literal god in someone's literal shed. And this isn't a spoiler because in the prologue, you are introduced to an entity in the woods just beyond this small rural community in Quebec called St. Ferdinand. And children stumble upon this entity, and of course, it's a horror book, so things go about as well as you think they do. And so fast forward to modern day St. Ferdinand, where after 18 years of living in fear, our ace inspector, Detective Stephen Crowley, has finally apprehended the St. Ferdinand killer, a serial killer of notoriety who is assumed to be responsible for a series of grisly murders and mysterious disappearances of the townsfolk. And he's finally captured and thrown in jail. Great. Wahoo. Story's over, right? No, we've just begun. The story very quickly starts to peel back the layers of the history in St. Ferdinand. And you suddenly start to realize that a lot of these characters know a little bit too much beyond what they should, to a supernatural degree. And suddenly you're thrown into a story of factions, of secret societies, all searching for the same goal, the entity, the god, as they call it. And who has inadvertently captured the god but one Venus Mackenzie in her shed with a $50 webcam. And I'm not joking about that. Again, this is all very much in the introduction of the book and kind of the point of the book as well. So the story becomes this race against different characters with different motivations, some for the greater good, some for what they think is the greater good, and some for just downright nefarious, selfish purposes, to find the god because they have been told that this god is basically a genie and can grant them any wish, anything their hearts desire. And this teenage girl just so happened to accidentally catch it because it operates by a series of very strict, very specific rules that is only known as Cicero's curse. So again, the book does end in a way that implies there's going to be more to the story. There's going to be a second and, of course, a third book to this trilogy. Now, my issue with reading it a second time is I'm starting to identify some issues in the writing, the technique, that kept distracting me from getting back into the story. And what I found is you have a lot of characters, but an omniscient voice. And I find the omniscient voice made every character feel very same, very one-dimensional. I feel like if we had gone with a first-person point of view for all of these characters, it might have been easier to bring out their individual, colorful perspectives. Again, a lot of these characters all want different things. They all fear different things, even though they're all after the same goal. So that bothered me. Another thing that bothered me is the insane repetition that the author felt he needed to put into the book to ensure we understood who was who. If I'm on page 300 of this book, I'm pretty sure I remember whose niece is whose uncle is who married who, and who broke up with who. I know who these people are. You don't need to keep reminding me 300 pages later. So that I found was also awkward and kept taking me out of the story. There's a lot of gore in here. The entire shtick of the god is all about gore and viscera and the ephemeral beauty of death. It is a god of hate and death as characters start to understand it. So those were very enjoyable and delightful to read. I'm sticking with a 3-star rating for this book. I'm revoking the 5-star rating from eons past now that I'm a more advanced, knowledgeable reader. And I will be picking up the second book later on in the year to reread that one as well. That one I'm a little more concerned about though, because I remember being disappointed with the second one. That second book in a trilogy, I swear, is always that awkward adolescent that kind of just sits in between a really epic beginning and a really crazy ending. So I'll get back to that at another video in the future to see how my reread goes along with the second book. Following this trend of multiple POV, another book that I read that actually technically isn't a horror, but one of my prompts in May was to read a genre that I don't typically pick up. So I requested and was gifted for an anniversary Such a Clever Girl by Darby Kane. And let me tell you, did this book light up on BookTube and BookTok. This was on social media everywhere as well. And I was genuinely curious about it, so I said, hey, I like a good mystery, I like a good puzzle, let's try it out. And I'm so glad I did. This book was 4.5 stars for me. 4.5 stars, and not a single ghosty, ghouly, or long-legged beastie. And I'll explain why. So the story with Such a Clever Girl actually starts 15 years prior, when the Tanner family mysteriously disappears. And it seems like the Tanner family is just cursed in this manner. And there are 3 women whose perspectives we follow in this story through a first-person point of view who know something about what happened 15 years ago. Not the full story, but enough that there's a collective anxiety and fear over what happened 15 years ago. And we open the book in a courthouse as the final living Tanner family member has passed away. And it is time to divvy up his estate. And our 3 women, a teacher, a cafe owner, and a therapist, are summoned to the courthouse for the reading of Mr. Xavier Tanner's will. And this sets off alarm bells for all 3 of them. What really ramps up the chaos and immediately intrigued me with this story is the appearance of Xavier Tanner's granddaughter, Aubrey Tanner, who has been missing and presumed dead for the last 15 years. So right away, you're slapped in the face with this big twist reveal that deeply unsettles our main characters and sends them into their own personal panic episodes. And the book basically becomes this mystery novel as these characters try to figure out who is foe and who is friend and what exactly happened that night and what happened to the Tanner family all those years ago. How were they actually involved? What responsibilities do they have here? And who the heck is the actual bad guy in all of this? And let me tell you, it is definitely not who you think it is. This book had me guessing until the very end, and the reveal knocked my socks off. It was a very satisfying ending for me. I had a fantastic time reading this. Super twisty, super psychological, lots and lots of red herrings though. I was very impressed with the way that Kane writes her story, and in comparison to A God in the Shed, this is how you do multiple point of view. I could very easily feel how different each of the characters were, what their quirks were, what their personalities were like, their likes, their dislikes, their wants, their fears, their motivations. And I will say, I docked that half star off my rating because Marnie is kind of annoying. If I have to hear Marnie talk about the roiling pit of anxiety in her stomach one more time, I am going to yeet this book across the room. So that was it. That was all. That's me being a little bit harsh and critical, right? 4.5 stars overall. I highly recommend this book. Even if you're just a horror fan like me, I think you'll get a kick out of what happens in this story. All right, next up, we're going back to another familiar author, and that is Jonathan Sims and Family Business. Now, if you remember one of my previous reading wrap-ups, I had read his other book, 13 Stories, and I came out of that book disappointed. It was the ending that disappointed me. But I wanted to give him another shot because, let's face it, The Magnus Archives is such a monumentally delightful piece of fiction work. I can't just read one of his books and let it go and say, nah, he's not good at this. Let's see what Family Business had to offer. And Family Business delivered. It met all of my standards, and I ended up giving this book 5 stars out of 5. So what happens in this story is we have a college student who is looking for work and has just recently gone through an extremely traumatic moment in her life. Her roommate, her best friend, Angie, has tragically and very suddenly passed away. So in order to kind of give herself a fresh start, she picks up a new job at Sloff & Sons. And Sloff & Sons is a cleaning company, but not like a house cleaning company, a corpse cleaning company. These are the folks that the police call in when they need somebody scraped off the pavement after a car accident. So that is where we start our story. Our main character, Dia, is introduced to Sloff & Sons, which is a family-run business. So the people that she works with are 2 sisters and their father, who is the owner. Now, things very slowly start to go weird and strange. And this little business that Frank has inherited from his father and his father before him starts to seem a little suspicious. Dia also starts to experience visions while she's on jobs. Disorienting and debilitating visions where she doesn't feel like she's in her own skin. And I want to emphasize that. Jonathan Sims is a fan-fucking-tastic writer. Not just the Magnus Archives, and even though I didn't like the ending to 13 Stories, the build-up and the characters that he put in that story were immaculate. The scenes where Dia goes through her hallucinations are so trippy. Sims has such an expert way with words that you don't even realize you're slipping from Dia's perspective to these hallucinations, and that is the point. You feel just as disoriented as our main character herself, and that is a beautiful way to write prose. That absolutely grabs you and pulls you into the pages of the story. Kudos, 10 out of 10 writing. I truly enjoyed the ending as well, because the ending is really gruesome, really grisly, and I swear I was making all kinds of faces. If I could have put the book down and just like covered my eyes somehow, that's what I would have done. It is horrific and very action-packed. I speed ran those final pages because I was just so enthralled and engrossed with what was going on. Lots of supernatural horror going on in here. That's definitely the core subgenre of this book. So if you're a fan of supernatural horror, highly recommend picking this up and giving it a shot for yourself. Pretty sure you won't be disappointed because the prose is just chef's kiss, honestly. Now, I ended up going back into the sci-fi side of things, and this next book is a bit of a weird one. I gave it 3 stars only because I honestly was going to give it 1.5, maybe 2 as I read it, but the twist reveal at the end actually felt like a 5-star reveal, so I'm super conflicted about this. And that book is William by Mason Coyle. If you've read this book, maybe you can help me put my feelings into actual articulate words, because I still am not really sure how to feel about this book all these weeks later. The titular character of William is actually an AI robot who was built and programmed by one of our main characters, Henry. And Henry's got a bit of a problem. Henry's got a serious case of agoraphobia, like a debilitating case. This man does not leave the house. And through a series of events that I don't think we truly understand, because the way Henry tries to describe it, he consistently fails to. His marriage to his wife Lily, who is very heavily pregnant in this story, is falling apart. He blames himself, he blames his agoraphobia, he wishes he could do more for his wife. And in the meantime of wrestling with all of these concepts, he's constructed William as his solution to his loneliness, essentially. And there are a lot of things wrong with William. There is a very long list of things that are not right with this AI bot. I already have problems with AI in general. Now you've given it a face, now you've given it limbs to move around. Absolutely not, no thank you. Now, this entire book had me very frustrated until the end reveal, because Henry is such an insufferable character. I hated him. I could not stand listening to this man lament and act so pathetic about his wife and his situation. There are certain scenes where it is painful to read because he is struggling so much to just be a decent fucking human being to the people around him. And this is aggravated when Lily invites over two of her co-workers for a dinner party. And things get wild and off the walls real fast. Because Henry's brilliant idea is, why don't we introduce them to William? And it goes about as well as you think it does. This gave me Chucky vibes at first. That's kind of what I was expecting from this. And then the book really veers off in another direction, and then you get hit with that twisty reveal at the very end. Oh my goodness. It was like the clouds parted and I could finally see clearly everything that the beginning of the book was trying to hint at. And that is why my final rating is right in the middle, a 3-star rating. Because that build-up, I honestly almost DNF'd this book. But if you can put up with Henry's absolute incompetence at being a decent freaking man, you will be rewarded with the ending. And the ending is horrific. There are implications that if you just let it sit with you for a few minutes, the dread starts to grow exponentially. Very excellent ending, very surprising ending. I had a good time with this book overall. Now, speaking of divisive books, the book that I want to talk about next has been on my most anticipated book list all year. I've been waiting for this one. And that's because it is the prequel to my current favorite book of all time, which might change by the end of 2026. But that book is We Used to Live Here by Marcus Kluwer, reigning champion of all books I've read thus far. And the prequel is called The Caretaker, also written by Marcus Kluwer. Not Cleaver, Kluwer. I apologize for mispronouncing the name last time. So as a recap, in We Used to Live Here, we have a young married couple who flip houses for a living. And while one half of this married couple is out in town running errands, a very well-to-do, very well-dressed, cookie-cutter white suburban family shows up on their doorstep while the other wife is home. And the father says, "Hey, I used to live here. I grew up in this house. Do you mind if I come on in for like 15 minutes just to show my kids where dad grew up?" And I know everybody and their mother in the comments right now knows what the correct answer to that question is. And it is a big fat no. But if our main character had said no, then we wouldn't have had a story. And our author had a story to tell. So now we go back to The Caretaker. Back in time. Maybe. And we'll get to that. So in The Caretaker, our main character is Macy Mullins, who is essentially the caretaker of her younger sister, and these two sisters recently lost their father in the most traumatizing and tragic way possible. There are heavy themes of depression, of OCD, and of grief in this book. So reader be warned, if this is a trigger warning for you, now you know. But the sisters live in absolute destitute conditions. A 1-bedroom studio apartment, and it's a junky one at that. Their landlord is a jerk, and they're running out of money. And Macy, as the older sister in The Guardian, understands she needs to find a better job like yesterday. And it just so happens that Macy stumbles upon an ad for a caretaker. And the description implies the job is going to consist of taking care of someone's very sick, very unwell husband. The wife is too old to be handling all these responsibilities on her own, and so she would like somebody to come in and help out for a weekend. And it's only for a weekend. And the pay is extremely attractive. So what does Macy have to lose? It seems like easy enough work, so she goes to the interview. And it's in the interview that the wife reveals, oops, I lied. My husband's actually dead. However, my husband was extremely particular. He had his rites, his rituals that needed to be complete on how to take care of this house and the property. And I have a personal trip booked for this weekend, so I can't be home to mind the rites, mind the house. So you as the caretaker will be responsible for taking care of the house and the property exactly the way my husband has done it and wants it done. And right away, Macy's like, I'm out. This is ridiculous. Like, you flat out told me I was going to take care of somebody, and now you're telling me they're dead. The smart thing would have been to walk right out and never look back. But again, we wouldn't have had the story that we get if that had happened. And so what ends up happening is these rites that Macy has to follow, as ridiculous as they sound at first, start to have increasingly horrific and terrifying consequences when she fails them. What I really liked about this book is the repetitive writing. This seems to be one of the divisive parts of this book. Some people found the repetition annoying and distracting, but for me, we're dealing with a highly traumatized character who suffers from depression. So the manifestation of severe OCD in the way she has to follow these rites, these rituals, these rules, is very true to her character. And it just makes the whole situation feel both more real, but also that much more fucking tragic as well. By the end of the book, you're just in a panic reading the same sentence over and over and over again as she constantly goes through these circuits around the house and the property to try and complete all of these complicated steps. And these steps, allegedly, are keeping something at bay. Basically maintaining the order of the physical universe. And if she fails, according to our deceased husband, a red sun will rise, and it will be far too late to fix anything by that point. So Macy obviously has a huge mental burden, once again placed squarely upon her shoulders. And the psychological twists and scenarios that Macy is subjected to in this book are absolutely terrifying, like bone-chilling. Kluwer's way of writing, and if you've read We Used to Live Here, there's that scene in the attic that everybody talks about. You get the same vibes in The Caretaker. Now, unfortunately, I do find The Caretaker fell flat in comparison to We Used to Live Here. And the reason for that, I feel, is the pacing. The beginning is quite slow. We do a lot of introspection into Macy's life and her current mental state, her depression, her psyche, her guilt, her grief, before we actually get to the exciting part of the book, which is the haunting. Whereas We Used to Live Here, that book just grabbed you hook, line, and sinker from like page 3 immediately and would not let go. The pacing in We Used to Live Here was far more consistent and really kept me entertained and on the edge of my seat all through the book from start to finish. Whereas The Caretaker, it took a bit of an uphill stroll to get to the point where I understood, like, okay, now the action is starting. Now things are going to get real scary real fast. And it was very unsettling. This is a bit of a thinky book as well. The ending is not quite so clear-cut. Even what's happening and unfolding, especially if you know what happened in We Used to Live Here, nothing is very clear-cut or transparent. You're left trying to put a bunch of unusually shaped pieces together in the hopes that it will make some form of sense. And I think I like books that do that to a degree. I had a really good time racking my brain trying to figure out what the logical rationale behind all of these hauntings was. So all in all, 4 stars out of 5. Definitely not the pillar of success that you saw in We Used to Live Here, but if you enjoyed that book, I still say give this one a shot. I really enjoyed it. And finally, last but definitely not least by a stretch, because this is going to be a 4.5 star that I'm about to talk about. This is another book that's been making its rounds on social media. This is another book that has been on people's most anticipated lists, and that is Wolfworm by T. Kingfisher. Now, I'm not familiar with Kingfisher's other works. There's the Sworn Soldier trilogy that a lot of people know her for. This is my first book by her. I was very excited when I read the premise, and it did not disappoint. Oh, this was gruesome. This was such a delightful read. Wolfworm is about a struggling artist named Sonia who basically grew up in her father's shadow in the scientific community. Her father was a botanist, and so she used to illustrate all of these plants that he was studying. So now she's been hired by an eccentric old scientist to illustrate his collection of bugs, of all things. Bugs, beetles, spiders, and flies, all manner of gross, creepy crawlies from the Underdark. And this story takes place in the late 1800s as well, so there's a historical element to it on top of that. And I think where the divisiveness in this book comes from is it is a bit of a slow burn. It's got that gothic slow burn element to it, where the majority of the start of the book is just the day-to-day happenings of Sonia as she's getting used to her new employer, who's kind of a dick, and her new living situation, and the servants, and her new job. Because she's taking over from the previous artist, and she feels like, as good as she is at what she does, the caliber of work that this previous artist did seems otherworldly. And nobody wants to talk about what happened to this other artist either. Sonia has to piece that together herself. Now, the way Wolfworm is written, because not much happens in the beginning of the story, it was actually hard for me to predict what kind of angle Kingfisher was going to come at with the hauntings. You've got mysterious candlelights in the woods, and you've got deranged woodland critters sneaking up to the balcony in the middle of the night, until the very end of the book. And the reveal is gross. There's some gross, nasty body horror described in this story. And it is delightful in how detailed the viscera and the imagery is in those scenes. I had a fantastic but disgusting time reading through them. I also have to say, I adore Sonia's personality. Where I think some folks struggle with the fact that not a lot goes on in the beginning of the book, I was really captivated by Sonia's sassy and sarcastic personality, and just the little quirks and the side notes and the footnotes that she threw in, her thoughts about what she was doing and what was going on around her. I really felt like I was in the mind of Sonia the artist. So I was entertained even during those more quiet and environmental moments. I'd say there wasn't really a single scene in this book where I felt bored, where I felt like, oh, that's enough, I'm going to put the book down and maybe come back to it, tomorrow or in a couple of days. This was a book where I really didn't want to put it down, even though the first half of it was fairly quiet and a slow burn. So I'm sticking to my 4.5 star rating for this one. I'm very happy with this introduction to Kingfisher's work as well. I'm very excited to see what else she comes up with. Oh my god, we actually made it to the end of the video. This was quite the endeavor to film, I'm not gonna lie. I think I've been sat here for about 2 hours going through different takes and figuring out what I want to say about each of these books. But I had a great time doing this, and reflecting back on all of these stories that I've read makes me realize how thankful I am to have gotten back into the hobby of reading. It's been such a fulfilling and soulful adventure so far, and I'm looking forward to continue it for the rest of 2026. Now, I'm not going to lie, I think my next reading wrap-up is going to be very sparse. If I'm going to have a June reading wrap-up at all, we'll see. I think after burning through so many books in May, I might need a bit of a breather to focus on one of my other creative pursuits for a temporary spell. Thank you all so much for tuning into this video. I appreciate each and every one of you for the support that you bring to the channel. And if you want to continue to support the channel to see more videos like this, then by all means go ahead and like, share, and if you so choose, subscribe for more content all about astrology and tarot and spirituality and esotericism and journaling, and yes, of course, more horror book reviews. I can't wait to catch you all in the next video. In the meantime, have yourselves a fantastic day, an even more fantastic week. Don't forget to take care of yourselves and each other, especially in times like these. Bye-bye.